Good morning. Last time, we ended in the middle of conversation between two people. The self built face to face, symbol by symbol. Today, we scale that up, way up. What happens when it's not two people talking, but one newspaper, one broadcast, one network speaking to an entire nation at once? Here's the question that will guide us. Can the media actually tell you what to think? Or does it do something far more subtle and gradually more powerful? We land in 1968 in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, in the middle of the United States presidential election. Two researchers, Maxwell McCombs and Donald Shaw, wanted to test something that had long been assumed but never rigorously proven. Does the media influence what the public considers important? They surveyed and decided voters about which issues mattered most to them, then compared those answers to the actual content of the news coverage those voters had been exposed to. The result, published in 1972, became one of the most cited studies in the entire field. The agenda-setting theory. The finding was elegant, and McCombs later summarized it in a now famous phrase: the media may not be successful in telling people what to think, but it is stunningly successful in telling people what to think about. In other words, by choosing which stories to cover, which to put on the front page, and which to ignore entirely, the media builds a public agenda of issues. The public then largely adopts that same ranking of importance, not because they are told an opinion, but because repeated exposure signals this matters. Later refinements introduced second-level agenda setting, which showed media doesn't just choose which topics matter, but also which attributes and frames of those topics get emphasized, shaping not the topic, but the lens through which we see it. Sociologically, this theory describes a specific kind of institutional power, the power to direct collective attention. Unlike Shannon Weaver's neutral signal of Schramm's negotiated meaning, agenda setting describes an asymmetry, a small number of editors and producers deciding each day what an entire society will collectively focus on. This connects directly to concepts like gatekeeping, the idea that news organizations act as filters between the vast flow of events in the world and the limited slice that reaches the public. It also raises questions central to sociology. Whose interests do these gatekeepers serve? Which communities get their issues onto the agenda, and which get systematically left off it? Psychologically, agenda setting works through a well-documented cognitive shortcut: availability. The more easily an issue comes to mind, because we've seen it repeatedly in the news, the more important and urgent we judge it to be, regardless of its actual statistical scale. This is closely tied to the psychology of salience and memory. It explains why people can dramatically overestimate the risk of rare, heavily covered events like plane crashes or shark attacks, while underestimating the risk of common but undercovered issues like heart disease. The mind doesn't calculate probability from first principles. It calculates it from how often and how vividly something has been placed in front of us. Agenda setting theory has faced real challenges too. Critics point out that it can overstate media's power while understating the audience's agency. People aren't blank slates. They filter, resist, and prioritize based on their own lived experience. Someone directly affected by unemployment doesn't need the news to tell them it matters. It also struggled to explain a media environment that didn't yet exist in 1968, one without a shared, unified agenda at all. When millions of front pages have been replaced by millions of personalized feeds, whose agenda is even being set anymore. And critical theorists pushed further, asking not just what agenda is being set, but who owns the machinery setting, a question that leads directly into the Frankfurt School's critique of media as an instrument of ideological control. So, why does this matter? Because agenda setting didn't disappear in the digital age. It was industrialized. Search engine rankings, trending topics, and recommendation algorithms are agenda setting machines operating at a scale McCombs and Shaw couldn't have imagined. Often personalized to a single individual rather than an entire nation. The core insight still holds, just relocated. It's no longer only editors deciding what leads the evening news, it's engagement optimized algorithms deciding what leads your feed. The mechanism changed the psychological effect. Mistaken frequency of exposure for importance has arguably only intensified. So we've moved from a message between two people to a message shaping the attention of an entire society. Agenda setting theory gave us a powerful tool. It explained how media shapes what we think about without needing to tell us what conclusion to reach. But it left an important question only half answered. Once media has our attention, what does it actually do to our long-term view of reality? Does watching the same themes repeated for years quietly reshape how we see the world itself? That question takes us to our next theory, cultivation theory, and George Sebernez's chilling idea of the mean world, shaped not by any single message, but by years of accumulated exposure. Thank you.